Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We have some breaking news we have to get to. This stuff is not looking the best with what's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine. Dow futures and the S&P futures are down right now. S&P down about 1.24%, 54 points, and Dow down about 1%, 0.91. 308 points. The stock market tomorrow, Tuesday morning, is likely not going to be the best stock market we've had in a while, primarily because of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now. The Russian RTS index, which is the biggest index in Russia right now, is down 17% as well. So some really not great stuff is going on. Let's analyze it. Let's talk about it. And let's try to figure out what's going on right now. Okay, so Russia tensions with Ukraine have been building up over the past couple weeks now. And essentially, Russia and Putin, he really wants to go back to the glory days. He never wanted Ukraine to be separated from Russia. He wants the USSR to still be intact. He has his own emotional ideas for what the world should be like. And as a result of him being a essentially dictatorial leader, he is able to enforce the things that he wants to enforce. And since 2014, nothing has necessarily happened to the level of escalation that we're seeing in 2022. And it's important to understand what happened in 2014 before we get into what really is happening today, February 21st, 2022, because what's happening today is not de-escalating situations, it's actually escalating stuff. So in February and March of 2014, Russia invaded and subsequently annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. This event took place in the aftermath of the Revolution of Dignity and is part of the wider Russia-Ukraine conflict that happened back in 2014. Now, when this happened in 2014, this essentially showed the world that Russia still had this like weird desire to have parts of Ukraine and to ultimately make Ukraine a part of Russia. Now, what happened in 2014 was also very interesting because the Crimean Peninsula was shown to not be the best governed by Ukraine. So there were some internal reports that a lot of people wanted to be part of Russia. In fact, there was this report that 95% of people actually voted to join the Russian Federation. Now, there are subsequent reports that said that was kind of fabricated, and a lot of those were lies. But nonetheless, Russia successfully was able to annex that portion of Ukraine, make it part of the Russian Federation, and the entire UN and all the other diplomatic NATO countries completely condemned it. Here's a really quick video I found on this. It's like a minute and 15 seconds. I think it'll do a lot to explain what happened in 2014. I'll be back right after this minute.
Anti-government protests sparked the Ukrainian revolution and the ousting of President Viktor Yanukovych. Russian President Vladimir Putin holds a secret meeting about extracting the deposed Yanukovych and annexing Crimea from Ukraine. Heavily armed pro-Russian gunmen occupy the Crimean parliament and allegedly force the emergency instatement of a new pro-Russian prime minister. The new Crimean Prime Minister takes control of Ukraine's security forces and officially asks Russia to provide assistance in assuring peace. Russia pledges the use of their armed forces in Ukraine. President Putin tells reporters that the unidentified soldiers occupying Crimean military bases are not Russian and says that Russia will not try to annex Crimea. A planned referendum to accede Crimea to Russia is condemned by the Ukrainian government, the US and the EU. Russia announces massive military exercises along the Ukrainian border. The US Department of State calls this an intimidation attempt in the lead-up to the referendum. Officials report that 95.5% of Crimean voters support joining Russia in the referendum, but many residents abstain. No international observation of the vote is allowed. The Crimean parliament officially joins the Russian Federation. US President Barack Obama announces sanctions against Russian and Ukrainian officials. The G8 votes to oust Russia over the unconstitutional referendum. They become the G7. Additionally, 100 countries support a UN resolution calling the March 16th referendum illegal. Russia accidentally releases documents suggesting the referendum vote may have been falsified. President Vladimir Putin admits that despite originally denying any involvement, the invasion and annexation of Crimea was planned all along. In the years since, a number of hard-hitting sanctions have been imposed on Russia by the United States and their international allies, crippling the Russian economy. In spite of widespread condemnation, Putin has made no concessions regarding Crimea and may have his eye on the rest of Ukraine.
Now, after that happened in 2014, it let two regions in 2014 to still be separate from Ukraine and Russia, and today, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed decrees recognizing two controversial separate held regions, the Donetsk People Republic and the Luhansk People Republic. I'm saying that wrong, but forgive me for that. Monday, in a ceremony carried on state television, he just had an hour-long live presentation. Now, it's really important to read this and sort of understand what's happening right here. The recognition of these separatist regions is very significant. War broke out in 2014 after Russian-backed rebels seized government buildings in towns and cities across eastern Ukraine. This is everything we talked about and everything you just saw in that video. Intense fighting left portions of the Donbass regions and eastern Luhansk and Donbass on blast in the hands of Russian-backed separatists. These are people that wanted to be part of Russia. These sort of like Russian extremists almost to some extent. Russia also annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 in a move that sparked a global condemnation. The separatist-controlled areas in Donbass became known as the LPR and DPR. The Ukrainian government in Kyiv asserts two regions are in effect Russian-occupied. The self-declared republics are not recognized by any government, including Russia. That's the key point here to understand. The Ukrainian government refuses to talk directly with either separatist republic. So these are just kind of two regions that have essentially been in ceasefire since 2014 after signing the Minsk Protocol, which basically was effectively this treaty that said, hey, like, let's just lay off. And today, we had some bad news. So the Minsk agreement in 2014 led to a shaky ceasefire agreement, and the conflict settled into static warfare across the line of contact. There were a lot of casualties as a result of that. More than 14,000 people have died in the conflict in Donbass since 2014. Ukraine says 1.5 million people have been forced to flee their homes, with most staying in the area of Donbass that remains under Ukrainian control, about 200,000 resettling in the wider Kyiv region, which is the greater part of Ukraine. Now, why is this important and why does this matter? When Putin basically acknowledged today these two decrees, that was this like formal acknowledgement that these two regions are separate, he's basically decided to take a stance. And what is the stance? Well, that stance is obviously against Ukraine, because Ukraine said, hey, we're not recognizing those regions. You don't have to recognize those regions. No one has to recognize those regions, and everything can be peaceful. With Putin basically saying, yeah, but we think those regions are independent, and they're definitely independent from you, Ukraine. Ukraine's like, all right, so what are you really saying, right? What's actually going on right now? This is a very strategic chess move by Putin. It is not good for the stock market. It is not good for easing and de-escalating tensions, because now it's Putin basically saying, hey, if those two regions are independent entities, then maybe there's some more stuff we have to talk about, especially some more stuff we have to talk about when it involves Ukraine and your independence as well. Now, Putin says that he was confident that Russia's citizens supported the decision after considering requests from the self-proclaimed DPR and LPR, and his argument is that the people in the DPR and LPR, the two regions we talked about, actually do want to be seen as this separate thing, and that may be a little bit of him spinning the truth. So his argument is like, hey, I'm just doing what they want to do, but in reality, it's a strategic chess move to further increase tensions with Ukraine. Now, what does this mean for markets? So there's a couple problems here. A lot of semiconductor grade neon comes from Ukraine, more supply shortages because of more sanctions that the United States would put on Ukraine to condemn them. Escalating tensions would mean that oil will get more expensive. This would mean more inflation. This would mean higher interest rates. For investors, a lot of people say that energy prices would allow crude oil to jump over $100 per barrel, because a lot of countries get 50% or more of their oil from Russia. And Russia, if they had sanctions on them, those countries would have to be able to get their oil from other places. There would be major supply shocks as a result of that, major inflation, because they're not able to get their oil from these places, which means other countries and other manufacturers would just raise their prices. It would be a mess for oil prices writ large, and that would obviously affect the entire global economy if oil prices raged over $100. Now, one of the investors, Larry Adam, Chief Investment Officer of Private Client Group, said, while we remain optimistic that a diplomatic resolution or de-escalation will ultimately result, this is not a certainty with tensions high, especially not with what Putin said today. A favorable outcome would reduce the current geopolitical risk premium built into oil prices from at least $5 to $10 and return oil closer to our year-end target of $80. So the year-end target for crude oil to get down to $80 a barrel will be possible if conflicts de-escalate. The question is, based upon what's happened today, is like, is Putin ready to de-escalate, or is he trying to do something different? Now, ultimately, what do I think is going to happen? There is a potential that this could be a war. How likely is the potential of it? I don't know. I would say I don't want to put a percentage, but it's very low percentage, just because a war hurts everyone. Like, at the end of the day, Russia's not going to benefit off this. This is likely, Russia randomly woke up a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, we're going to go take over Ukraine, right? Now, obviously, they've been thinking about it for a very long time, but for them to just randomly get up and do it, to me, either signals that they're trying to renegotiate a lot of the deals they have with NATO. Obviously, Russia does not want to be part of NATO. China is not part of NATO. NATO is this international organization of governments that are supposed to spread democracy, and Russia and China aren't really democratic. So Russia does not want Ukraine to be part of NATO as well. So a lot of this could just be negotiations, tactics, posturing, some of the stuff that has happened since 2014. Now, Russia got Crimea in 2014. They annexed the region, so they got a significant result out of that, but it didn't lead to an entire war. It didn't lead to Russia literally going into Ukraine and invading the region and making Ukraine a part of Russia. If that were to happen, bad things would necessarily happen. So my analysis of this is that it is bad, and the stock market tomorrow is going to be bad, and it's likely going to be bad for the next month unless tensions de-escalate. But I don't think this means a whole war is coming, because Russia doesn't win if that happens. They win if they get to posture, especially in the weird, irrational way that these types of people who lead countries want to posture. But it's not necessarily going to mean that they get any benefit if they actually invade. Now, one quote I want to read is that despite near-term volatility in the wake of geopolitical events over the past 3 decades, ranging from terrorist attacks to the start of wars, stocks have tended to bounce back relatively quickly, rallying 4.6% on average in the 6 months following such crises dating back to 1990 and rising 81% of the time. It's not wise to bet against the market or to time when to sell in case of a tension, because tomorrow you wake up and the tension's gone or the tension gets worse. It's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, it made sense if you sold it a couple months back, if you saw all this Russia-Ukraine stuff happening, but probably not right now, right? So in general, Fed policy and economic conditions tend to be more long-term drivers of the economy and financial markets rather than isolated geopolitical events. Geopolitical events will hurt stocks that are in a bad position right now in the short term, but it doesn't mean over the long term, as long as there's not something absolutely catastrophic like an entire invasion of a country, do we need to expect stocks to necessarily just go away, right? This is not like the apocalypse, I would say. Now, could it turn into apocalypse? Potentially, but again, the percentages of that's very low, and it's really important to keep that in perspective given what has happened historically, especially given Russia's relationship historically with trying to posture as if they own the entire world. So those are my thoughts. Things are not looking good right now, but the market is probably not going to look good either. However, we will tend to bounce back, I'm assuming, as long as things start to de-escalate. The question here is, what is Russia's next move? Are they going to go in? Are they going to actually load up their troops? Or did they just officially, put these decrees out there and they wanted to get things riling, get people moving, and just get the conversation started, get the party started, and then they're going to back off as if nothing happened? I mean, we don't know. Russia has a lot of the world's oil. A lot of countries get a lot of resources from Russia. They're net producers of wheat and grain and corn, and it's not going to be good for them if they get sanctioned because the entire world's not feeding their economy. And they're not, if their oil exports go away, I mean, that only hurts them, right? So unless they have this irrational desire to have Ukraine back to the glory days of before, it's not good for geopolitical or economic tensions for their own people. So the logical case is nothing's going to happen to that big of an extent, but the short-term case in terms of headlines for stocks are likely going to drive them a little bit lower than what we've seen right now. So we will see what happens. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was going on with Russia and Ukraine? Thank you guys for watching. We'll keep updating you on the story, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.